Hello, I'm Hazel from Hazel A Patterns and welcome to my latest video. So today we are going to make the bag organizer. This is the pattern. The link to buy that will be below, and it is entirely made from pattern pieces, so not a single bit of measuring with your ruler unless you want to. So without further ado, let's get on with it, because there is a sad tale when it comes to this pattern, to do with running out of interfacing. So anyway, let me show you. This is what we're actually making today. This is the version I'm making in the video. This is the version from the photo tutorial, and this is one of my test versions. So you may notice that all of these look very slightly different. I ran out of interfacing, which is the world's worst, believe it or not, for any sewer. My cameraman is laughing at me. He's like, what? But actually, we sewers know that running out of interfacing is the worst thing that can happen in the middle of a pattern. So this was made beautifully with my usual woven interfacing. But when it came to making the one for the photo tutorial, not only was I using a beautiful soft art gallery fabric, but I had to use a soft and slouchy interfacing. So the look of these bags are very, very different. Then I had an emergency because I really had to get on with making a video because of the timings. So I ended up buying some super cheap interfacing from the internet, which is what this one's made of. So you can actually see straight away the difference in how all of these sit. I will show you inside. We have handles that can fold over, and then inside we have a pocket which is for my phone. I've made a little pocket for my pen, two more pockets there, a key fob, and the pièce de résistance is a zipped divider in the centre. Now you can see this is I think these are Moda fabrics and some others. I think some Macawa as well there. These are sort of quite thick fabrics, and I've used a very firm interfacing and fusible fleece, and it sits absolutely perfectly. This one here is the one from the photo tutorial, and you can see it's a little bit slouchy. It still works, does the job perfectly well, but if I'd actually thought about it, I would have probably used bag foam stabilizer. And the last one, because everything is as I expected, although it is a much cheaper fabric, I won't tell you where I got it from, but a major supermarket chain might have. We won't go into names there because I should be buying all my fabric from So Fabulous Fabrics because they are the very best. But anyway, this is the one of the original versions, and it's absolutely fine. So anyway, if you have a soft fabric, think about making sure that you use quite a firm interfacing, and consider using bag foam stabilizer. I have a video available and a free download about how to prepare bag foam stabilizer for use. So I suggest if you want to go down that route, watch my video. The link will be below. Other than that, that's enough waffling, because I can see my cameraman is very cold. It's a horrible, horrible day today. So let's get on with it. So before you begin sewing, obviously you need to cut out your pattern pieces, join them where necessary, and you'll notice that there are a lot of these little triangle notches on the pattern. Now this is hopefully to make it a bit easier for you to stitch these straight gusset pieces to the curved side pieces. So what I suggest you do is cut out a little notch on each of the triangles before you start sewing. I use this pattern notcher. Obviously you don't have to use one of those. And then when you come to your pattern pieces, first of all, I would actually fuse the interfacing before you start cutting out, purely because there are lots of curves, and again, with anything curved with a shape, it makes it easier to interface first, because then you're going to preserve that nice curve. And then what I've done into the lining pieces, you can see I've just transferred the marks to the reverse. Occasionally you'll need to transfer the marks to the front of the pattern piece, might make it easier for you, but you should be able to see and reuse the pattern piece if you need to do that. Okay, then with the outer pieces, you also need to fuse fusible fleece onto the back of them. The handle, the bottom part of it, let's get the right way around for you, you need to have 3/8 of an inch gap. Obviously what I've done is left a bit of an extra gap there to help the handle fold in more easily for you. If you feel that your fabric is particularly thin, or you're using a quite thin interfacing, you could use fusible fleece for this. And I have got a tutorial video online and a free download which shows you how to cut out and use bag foam stabilizer. I might have said fusible fleece there. This is the first video. It always goes a bit wrong, but it will be fine. Check out the video for using the foam stabilizer. I'll put the link in the comments at the bottom. Okay, now we're ready to start sewing. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create our zipper end tabs. And you can see I've done one already. So this is what we're aiming to end up with. I like the stitching, nice neat top stitching, to be on the front. You could reverse this and do this the other way, or obviously you need to stitch into the ditch there. So what I've done first of all, working on the back of the zip, I have stitched an end tab on facing down at 1/4 inch seam. Use your hump jumper here if you want to get a nice neat finish, because otherwise the zip will tend to catch on the feet of your machine. So then what you do, flip that over. You can use an iron if you want to, but I'm not going to worry because this is such a tiny piece. I don't need to get it absolutely perfect, and this edge stitching will hold it in place. So again, fold that in it and then go over to the machine and edge stitch it around just at the bottom to hold it neatly in place. So I will go and do that, and then we will layer up our dividing pouch. So there's our zipper. Before we actually start layering up our pouch, the first thing we need to do is fold this zipper in half and mark it so we can see where our center mark is. I'm going to do it with the friction pen because then you can see it, but you can use whatever you have. Some people make a little snip. I don't normally do that, but you're welcome to. There we go. So it means we know we've got a top center mark on the pouch itself, which I'm going to line up with the mark I've just made on my zipper, with the zipper face down. Now I'm going to use clips to make sure everything is held in place, but then I will take you over to the sewing machine and show you the method that I used in the previous pattern, because that's my special method of getting the zip in perfectly every time. So we now have the center mark on the top of the lining. So should be able to look down and see everything. There we go. So actually what I like to do, now I've just got that lined up, I'm going to make sure all these ends are lined up here. Then I'm just going to put one clip in
because when we go over to the machine, we're going to take all of these clips out, and we're actually going to lay everything together and make sure it's really neatly together as we go along. But that's it to start with. So right sides together and zip face down. So here we go. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see really well here because of where I've put the camera, and you might notice a slight difference in quality and sound because I'm using my old phone as the camera, so I don't have to move the other one. So here we go. You remember we lined everything up using the center mark, and then I have put just one clip in there to hold everything. So I'm going to line up all my ends. I'm using the 1/4 inch mark on the plate of my sewing machine, and I'm going to line it up neatly. I'm using my ordinary zipper foot. If you have a 1/4 inch zipper foot, then brilliant. I think some people also use an industrial machine with a very narrow foot, also great. Just use what you have. So let's see if we can get this sewing. Obviously reverse like you would normally. Just be very aware that you've got a great big thick zipper tab there. So what I'm going to actually do to get past that zipper tab is pop my hump jumper in. There we go. And that gets us exactly where we need to be. So here's where we move everything up. Now obviously using this kind of zip where the tabs are actually having closed the zip means you can't sew with this out of the way, so you're going to have to pull this out of the way as you go. So I'm going to just go a little bit closer to it. There we go. Line up all your edges. Make sure it's on the 1/4 inch mark here. That's my hump jumper falling off, and I've got enough space. Actually, what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to pull it back this way. Keep checking that everything is lined up. Then when you get to the zipper, pull it down out of the way, which is going to open the zipper. And then we're just going to go to the end, doing exactly the same thing. So just keep checking, put your finger down to hold all your layers in place. Check that everything's straight here. Now you notice the lining is not interfaced. That is to deal with bulk. So you might find that it stretches a little bit by the time you get to the end, but that's not a problem. Just trim it down afterwards. There we go, so you can see that the stitching line is nice and even, and then what I would do now is flip the whole thing over, pull this back, use your fingernails or a seam roller to press it open, and then I'm going to need to change my thread out, but what I'm going to do then is just top stitch enclosing that seam there but leaving the lining free, and I'll show you why later.
So here we are. I have stitched both sides of the pouch, so you can see we now have an open pouch. I have a little confession to make though. When I stitch, I'm not using my usual interfacing. I ran out and I didn't have time to wait for a delivery, so I got some cheap interfacing from the internet, and I've just managed to shrink it. So what I ended up doing, hopefully this is a useful tip for someone, I pulled off the old interfacing,
and just cut it back to the end here, reattach a new piece of interfacing. So I just need to put the marks back on before I get going. I just forgot that this was a much cheaper interfacing than I usually use, and my iron was too hot. So there we go. You can recover from these things. And what we're going to do now is going to make sure that this is nicely pulled away from the zip on the inside. Now, the reason we don't top stitch the lining in place, I mean, I do occasionally on patterns, but usually we don't, is because often it'll bubble up. And if you're zipping, if your lining bubbles right up and you stitch it in place, you can see what's going to happen is it's going to get in the way of the teeth of the zip. So when you actually go to use it, you run the risk that your zip is going to stick. So having done it this way, we can stretch it right back on both sides and then flip it over, and you can see our marks are all lining up at the bottom, apart from not on that side because there are no marks. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually make sure everything's pulled away neatly at the top, and we're going to line up these sections at the top here. So I move that up, you can see you've got your zipper tab and then these. So just going to clip that in place. You can do the same on the other side. So again, pull the lining down and there and match everything up. And then what we're going to do, just to hold everything in place, so we actually have got a finished pouch, is we're going to stitch at 1/8 of an inch all the way around the whole piece to hold it. And then we're going to pop it to one side because we're going to work on the slip pockets. So before we start creating our slip pockets, we need to do the key fob if you're going to make the key fob. So I've got my piece here, no interfacing on this because it doesn't need it. So this is a really straightforward method you'll have done before. We make pull tabs like this, we make straps. So first of all, we're going to press it in half. Then open it out and press the ends to the center. And finally, we're going to press a little hem in the bottom to finish the ends off. So 1/4 of an inch is fine. You can do more if you want to. And then we're going to fold everything back together. So if you end up with little fronds like this, I suggest you deal with them before you actually start stitching. There we go. So I am going to go over to the machine and I'm going to edge stitch it, going down one long edge, across the bottom and up the other edge. Now normally you would actually stitch in the same direction if you're doing a strap or anything, but because this is quite narrow, it's not going to be a problem. So here we go. You can see I have stitched. That end isn't stitched at all. This end I've stitched across the bottom. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my little lobster claw. This is a tiny one. And I'm going to thread it through, work out which is the best side of top stitching. And then I'm going to fold it up around 3/4 of an inch. Yep. That's it. And then I'm going to take it over to the machine and stitch around in a little box to secure it. And then we'll pop it to one side and make our first slip pocket. So we have our fabric B piece, which is interfaced. That is going to be the exterior of the slip pocket. So we'll turn it over
And then, unlike the usual where everything is right sides together, this we need the right side to be on the exterior. So I'm going to literally line it up over the first piece. Now, I have cut my binding strip in one piece because I find it's less wasteful. Just trim off what you need. So we're going to put that face down at the top, match the edges, and then I'm going to go and stitch that at 1/4 inch. So there we go, you can see I've attached those, so I'm going to just quickly flip it over and trim it down. And then I'm going to use my iron this time because this is a slightly longer seam than when we did the zipper tabs. But essentially this is exactly the same method as the zipper tabs. So press that back, obviously making sure my iron's not too hot and I don't melt the interfacing again. And then I'm going to fold that down and press to create a nice line. Get my iron out of the way and switched off, and then I'm going to fold it down again. I'm going to clip that to hold it neatly in place, and then I'm going to edge stitch along the bottom. I'll bring that back and show you, and then we'll do our second pocket, which involves the key fob. So I've done the same again, so laid it up right sides out on both pieces, and this is really straightforward. I'm going to put my key fob in about 1.5 inches from the end. I've got it with the flap facing upwards because we're going to flip it over. But there we go. So we pop that in position before we add our binding. So I'm just going to put something to keep it in place. I'm actually going to clip it at the bottom edge as well to stop it from moving onto the diagonal. There we go. So I'm going to go and stitch that, and then I will be back. So we're going to press our binding exactly as before, and this time we're going to flip the key fob up as well. It's handy to do that when you're at the pressing stage because it just then gives you a nice line really. So we're going to do the same again as we did before. So you're trying not to press my interfacing too much, just in case I melt it again. And flip the binding down like we did before. And this time we're going to flip this down. Again, give it a little press just to create a nice crisp fold at the top. And then when you edge stitch again, you're going to edge stitch through this as well. I'll just show you the other edge stitching that I did on this one. So right close to the edge means you get a second line underneath, but it gives it a little bit more stability at the top of the pocket. So we're going to take our slip pockets and lay them over the lining side. So the one with the key fob, I'm going to actually stitch down the centre. So let's line this up neatly. You can use your ruler to just double check you've got it evenly above, because sometimes the pattern can make things look like they're on the skew. There we go. So I'm going to just pop a clip in either side because I know that everything is in the correct place.
And then I've transferred the centre mark to the exterior, because then I can use that with my ruler to show me. Ooh, might have to move my clip slightly out of the way. That's all lined up neatly. That is where I'm actually going to stitch. So you can either draw a line and then just remember to remove it afterwards, but I'm going to use my favourite trick, which is use some washi tape. There we go. So that is now a nice straight line for me to sew against. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stitch that line first, top stitch down, and then I'm going to stitch all the way around. I'm actually going to stitch from one side to the centre and then from the other side to the centre to make sure that everything stays nice and straight. So here we have both of our lining sides that have had the slip pockets attached. So you can see this one's joined in the centre, and I've secured all around the outside edge. There's our key fob, and then the second one, the one without the key fob, is made from my mobile phone, which is massive. So I've got quite a big pouch for the phone, and then just a small pouch at the end here, which I'm going to use for a pen. So now we're going to go and prepare the rest of our lining. So the first thing we need to do is take our lining gussets, and they're going to be stitched in pairs. So we're going to place them right side together, and then stitch a 1/4 inch seam at the bottom of each of the pairs. Now you'll notice that these have got the little lines on as well. These are to help us create our curved section. So while I'm doing the stitching for the bottom seam, I am then going to stitch at just short of a 1/4 inch in from the edge between those two lines. So you're going to end up with stitching here, here, and here and here on both pairs. Before you actually do the stitching, turn your stitch length right down. So I'm probably going to have mine at 2 or 2.2 rather than the usual 2.4, just because it gives us a little bit more protection when we make our little cuts, which we'll be doing next. So here you can see this is just one of the gusset pairs that I've made. I have snipped all of the loose ends from the front here because they have a habit of getting caught in the final seam, which is really annoying. Okay, let me just measure and I can show you how far away I've stitched. So it is literally just short of 1/4 inch. So your seam line is going to be at 1/4 inch, and you know you need to stitch just a tiny bit away from this marking to get your seam in the correct place. The next thing we need to do is snip into this seam to create little like little tabs. So I'm going to snip into each of these marks first because they match the marks on our lining side. And that's it. So we need to do that for all 8 of these little sections. There we go. I will do the other gusset, the other lining gusset later. So next we're going to take one of our lining sides. This is the one without the key fob, just because it will be easier to show you without anything flapping around. And what we're going to do, we're looking to match up
various marks. So the mark at the bottom, this one, is going to match to our seam here. So match that and clip it. I'm just going to take my cardigan off. That's more like it. So the next marks you're going to match are, this first mark here will match up with the same mark on the other side. That just shows where the curve begins. And the same on the other side. There we go. The top should match the top, but don't worry if there's any difference in height. It just means that when you've cut out, you may not have cut out quite as accurately as you would have liked. And then this one here matches that one there. I'll show you it in a second. I'm not putting any pins or marks, clips or anything in the curve section, because when we go to stitch that, and I will stitch that on camera for you, you will see that we will splay out the little tabs that we've just cut in order to get a really accurate finish. I'm missing a mark on that side, but we'll assume, since all the others matched up so nicely, that this one will have done the same. So what you can see now is when you squish down, these tabs splay out to match the curve that you've already got. And then what we're going to do when we take this over to the sewing machine, we are literally going to stitch just to the other side of the line we already have there, because we know then that we are stitching an accurate curve. So that's it on the other side. Means that the gusset will be squashed a little bit, but when you get round to the other side and you look at it, you should have a really nice curve. So I'm going to take you over to the sewing machine and let's do that.
So here we go. We are going to start as we usually will. I'll tell you what I'm just going to do is turn my stitch length back up to 2.4, because otherwise it'll just take too long. But I will turn it back down again when we get to the curve. So you can see the lining actually swings in here. That's so that you can stitch the whole seam at 1/4 inch. You can feel you're going to go over a ridge there, but you shouldn't have any problems. If you think you've used a particularly thick fabric, then you can use a hump jumper there. So I'm actually going to take this clip off. So we're going to slow right down and I'm going to drop my needle and turn my stitch length down again. And then I'm actually taking the other clip out. We know that everything fits nicely, so no, we don't need to worry. Then that's going to allow me to really splay out my clips to the correct position. So all I'm going to do now, I'm not using the edge of my 1/4 inch seam anymore to guide me round. I'm actually using the seam I've already stitched, because we know that that is actually just under 1/4 inch. So as I go round, I'm going to be splaying out my little tabs so that the edges match the edge of the curve. And I'm just doing a little tiny bit at a time until I'm sure, oops, not ready yet to pull round. There we go, and that's it. Go back to the straight seam. So you can turn your stitch length back up. Sorry, you can see my hand going in front of the camera there. And take this off. Here we go again. It's released all the tension, so everything should sit nice and flat. I'm going to stitch up to where the other stitching begins. Turn my stitch length down again. And we're going to repeat the process. So splay out your edges so that they're perfectly sitting next to the edges of the curve, and just keep walking it round, and each time shift everything. You should see that you are stitching within the line of the stitching. Okay, so let's have a little look at this. So what we're looking for is so there are no creases or tucks inside, which you can see that is fine. There's a nice curve. Let's look at the other side. Yep. And then when you turn it over, you can see you've created a nice shape going round, and on the other side. The other thing you're looking for is that the stay stitching that you did to hold the pocket in place is covered, which it is. So I will do the other one, and then we will work on the divider pocket. So in the last sequence, what I totally forgot to say was that you need to leave a turning gap. So hopefully in the edit I will have gone back in and put something in words to remind you of that, so you don't have to do what I did and unpick. So just in case you do ever have to unpick, I've actually gone in and done some reverse stitching at each end to make sure that when you go through to put it through, you're not going to lose all of your nice stitching. So I've now got two segments, both lining sides, and we are now going to attach our divider. Now, if you are super clever and confident, you could do this as a oneer and attach both sides at the same time. I'm not that person. Good luck to you if you are. So what we are going to do is we're going to attach one side and then we're going to attach the other. Now what I've done, I've just transferred all of the markings to the exterior on both sides. So you can see there, because that's what we're working on. We're not working on the interior with this one. So basically we're going to do exactly what we've just done for the two sides. The only slight difference will be this does not go all the way up to the top. So there will be a section where you want everything to join, but again, it's exactly the same marks that we've used previously. So you should find everything fits nicely. I'll just show you whereabouts it fits to. On the side, so there we go. So it will fit to about here. So on the first
lining side, you can just stitch it from there downwards, and then when you go to join the second lining side on, oops, you will then stitch all the way down from the top. You will definitely need your hump jumper to get past this section though, just a warning. So I'm just going to finish clipping this, and then I will go over and sew it, and then we'll set it up to be stitched the second time. There we go. So that's it, ready to go onto the sewing machine and be stitched. Here we go. So I have attached the first side, and I have also clipped on the second side. Now, what you need to do when you stitch on the second side, you need to make sure your stitching covers the first line of stitching. So you can either make this line of stitching slightly smaller or just be really, really accurate with your stitching. So if necessary, you can have a look at it and then go back in and do extra rows of stitching if you need to. I am going to go and stitch this. Obviously, when you do so, you need to keep making sure that this piece that you've already stitched is pulled back as far as possible so it doesn't get into your stitching. Okay, I will go and stitch that and then show you the finished result. And there we have it. Now, I did go back in and have a look at the stitching, and there was one small section where you had some visible stitching just down here, mostly because I hadn't actually lined up the edges of my piece properly. So I went back in, you can see there's a second bit of stitching just to take account of that. And other than that, we are done. Everything is sealed up, so the pockets are ready to use. We have our turning gap for when we go to turn through. That's it, you can just see it there. And the last thing we need to do before we finish off is use the pinking shears or whatever you want to choose to use to trim our seams down, because that's going to make everything fit together so much easier. So I'm going to leave this section with the little tabs at the top untrimmed, because we need to use those to match up our other marks. Once I've trimmed down, I'm also going to open out the seams just here, and then we are ready to work on our outer. We're going to create our handles now, and we start off with the handle ends. So we're going to take one of our handle end pieces, and we are going to match the short ends together like that and stitch a seam. Here are some I prepared earlier. Ta-da! So what we need to do now is turn these through and press them, and we're going to press them in pairs so that the seams are complementing each other. I want the seam to be open, so I'm actually going to just use my fingers to press it open inside, and we want the seam to be about 1/4 of an inch from one end. Now, this is where, if you had a fabric that had a really specific design on it, you'd probably have a look and see where the design is resting, so that you can decide whether to have the seam that side or that side. But in this fabric, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to pop that one down. We'll give that a press in a second. And then I'm going to do the same with the other end. Again, open it out. Oops. Open out the seam. And then we want the seam to be on the other side.
and then we're going to just press them. Then we fold them in. We'll do the other one in a second, but I'm just going to show you, the last thing you need to do is draw a line at 7/8 of an inch down, and we're going to stitch. I'm using my friction pen so you can see what I'm doing, but if you're concerned at all about using that on your fabric, then you can use some chalk, or you could use washi tape like we did before. So 7/8 of an inch from the fold, making sure that's nice and square. There you go. Just going to draw that line, and then we're going to top stitch up, along and back down again on all 4 pieces, but working in pairs. So this one's got the seam on that side, this one will have the seam on the other side. Okay, I will go and stitch all of those. So we're ready to attach our ends to our handle, and just so you remember, the bottom of the handle piece has got the slightly bigger gap. So we're going to attach our handle ends to the top, and we're going to set them 1/2 an inch in with the seams, you can feel inside to find them, to the outside, and we're going to put them in upside down. There we go. So what I'm going to go and do quickly is just stitch these in place to hold them before we actually join the handle together, and then pull them through. So here we have a handle with the end stitched on. Take our piece, our fabric B piece, lay it over and stitch around. You will probably need to use your hump jumper when you come to go over the handle ends, and you can also use it round the side to stop the seam from curving in too much. Here's the one I did a minute ago. You can see the seam really tried to curve in there, but I went back and restitched it. So snip off the edges so you can get a slightly nicer corner, and then you can use the handle ends to pull it through. Now there are really great tutorials for getting sharp, crisp corners if you want to. I'm not that worried in this case. So what I'm going to do is turn this through as nicely as I can. I have got a point turner somewhere that I've put down, and I will use that in a second, and then press this and edge stitch all the way around. And there we go. You can see it's top stitched all the way around, obviously not at the bottom. I actually did change my threads, so I had the pink thread in the bobbin and the blue thread on the top as well. And that's it, ready. You don't have to put the handles in until much later. You'll be very pleased to hear, so you're not trying to pull through any wooden bits. There we go. We are ready now to complete our outer. Before we start to join our outer together, we've got the very straightforward thing of finding our centre mark for our handle, and we're going to attach it just to hold it in place with a line of sewing at about 1/8 of an inch down. Now I have chosen to have mine this way round because I like the idea that when the bag is open you can see just the outer, and then when it's closed it just gives that beautiful hint of the lining. But you can choose to do yours a different way round if you wish. I'm going to go and sew both of these on, and then we will start with gusset. So here we have our prepared side. I have just attached, you can see, just 1/8 of an inch down all the way along to hold that in place. And then we are working on the gusset. This process is exactly the same as when we did the lining. So I've stitched it together, opened out the seam, and then for each of the pairs of marks, stitch between those marks. You can see they're at just under 1/4 of an inch in, and then I've gone ahead and cut little tabs. And then what we're going to do, exactly like we did with the lining, we're going to match up the marks and the ends. So first mark there, pop a clip in, one at the top, the second one, oops, let's match the middle mark first. Oops. You can see those little pieces there are going to splay out nicely. And again, like before, when you stitch, you're going to stitch just close to, but not on, the previous line of stitching. So the same distance that you did away from the 1/4 inch, that's the distance you're going to stitch. You can put more clips in if you choose to. As you know, my preference is slightly less clips and actually line things up very carefully when I go to stitch. There we go. So I'm going to take that over to the machine, stitch that in place, and do exactly the same for the other side, and then I will show you the finished outer. So here we are at this stage where both the gussets are attached. I've checked the corners and they have come out pretty rounded, and there are no little tucks, so I am happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is pinking shears to trim down the seams. And now we're going to turn it through. So you can see we've got nice rounded
corners. And what I'm going to do before I do the next stage, I'm just going to persuade it to crease as much as possible. This is where, if you've got a very soft fabric and a soft interfacing, you can come unstuck because the bag will not hold its shape. So if in doubt, use the foam instead of fusible fleece. And there we are. We're ready to pop our bag into our lining and stitch everything together. And we're on the final section now. So we have our completed outer. And we have our completed lining. So you'll probably remember one of the sections has got a turning gap in it. And we are now going to roll up our bag to a certain extent, not completely. So I'm going to squish it down and roll it up a little bit to make it shorter. And we're going to pop it into the side that has the turning gap. And what we're going to have to do then is pull everything across and around, which is why this divider is nice and low, so you've got plenty of space to play with. And what we're going to do now is we're going to match up our seams. Now I'm going to put one of the seam allowances in one direction and the other one in the other to nest it so that we have less bulk at the top. So I'm going to match the center marks. I'm going to make sure with each of these that the seam allowances are set in exactly the same way each time. So these two on the lining are facing inwards, and then the two seams on the outer are facing towards the gusset each time. It will look to start with like everything's too loose, but as soon as you start pulling it into position, it will all fit. So I'm going to keep clipping this together. Okay, so it's all in, but it looks like it's wrinkling up at the top, but as we're sewing it, we will be sewing it from the inside, so keeping it exactly like this, and then the machine will go on the inside, and then we're just going to have to keep pulling everything around as we go. So I'm going to take you over to the machine and we will stitch the top.
So here we go. I'm going to go quite slowly. I'm going to keep making sure that the top of the lining and the top of the outer are lined up. I will try very hard not to get my hands in front of the machine. Obviously you will get them every time I take a clip out, but here we go. So there we go. I'm just going to have a little look. I can see I knew something had gone wrong there, and you can see I've made a little jump. So what I'm going to do is go back and redo that and make sure it's nice and smooth. So what we're really looking for is nice smooth seams. Again, there's another couple of places where I might have taken a little jump, but you can go in and just restitch sections where necessary. This one's fine though. Right, I will go in and restitch, and then I'll take you back over to the main camera and we will have a look and see how it looks.
So here we have it. As you can see, there's extra rows of stitching around the top where I've gone back round and done it again, but I'm really happy that what I've ended up with is nice and smooth. Now, I'm not actually going to trim down the top seam here because it's not that thick, and I think it's actually going to help with the stability of the bag anyway. So what we're going to do now is pull this through this turning gap. Now, what you've got to remember with this is you're not actually trying to pull the thick thing through the small hole. You're trying to pull the thinner lining down over the thick thing. Once you get that into your head, it does make life a little bit easier. So obviously this is going to look dreadful when it first comes out because this is going to be very creased, but we can steam it if necessary to get a better finish. Or we can even press it if we pad it out with something and just use the iron. There we go. So I'm going to just make sure that top seam is finger pressed, and then we'll push the lining back inside. And then what you do, it's a process of sort of pulling the seam apart and rolling it with your fingers so that the seam is actually at the top. And actually, I like to roll it so that there's the actual lining is about 1 millimetre or 1/16 of an inch or so away from the top. There we go. So basically I'm going to go around and clip this whole section, and then we will top stitch.
So you can see I've turned the bag inside out, so we're working from the exterior again. What I would normally do under these circumstances, I would start somewhere where it's not likely to be seen, like on the side, but I'm actually at side of the gusset, but I'm actually going to start on the side because most of the time the handle will be flipped open. So I've turned my stitch length up, and what I'm going to do around this section here is make sure I try and pull the handle up as much as possible. If in doubt about whether you're going to make it neatly over the seam, use a hump jumper. That's what I'm going to do here. And here we have it. Slightly bouncing the camera for you there. I will go and turn this through again and we'll have a look at what the finished article looks like. Then we will stitch our turning gap closed and put our handles in. We are very nearly finished. I have gone around and given this a jolly good steam. I mean, as I said earlier, I use the very cheap interfacing, so it's not as good as I would like it to be, but never mind. And then what we need to do next is insert the dowels. So I've actually decided to use a little bit of double-sided tape on mine, purely because I am usually forbidden from using wet glue wherever possible, just because I tend to make a big mess of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert the dowel first, and then we're going to take off the tape. So if you slide it through from the inside, because the seam is there on the outside, it actually is easier to do it from the inside. Slide in the other side. Oops. Just pull it further back and then push it in. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to pull it out, and then I'm just going to take the double-sided tape off the paper, and with any luck we can get it in. Again, we might need to pull it out and pull it back in again. Once we get it into position, you can just press it into place. Then we'll do the same with the other side. You can put it in without using any kind of glue, but what I've found with the other ones that I've made that I've been using is that it will tend to, then the dowel will tend to slide out. So make sure it's nice and straight. Quite. Yep, that's it. And then make sure the dowel's to the end and push. I'm going to do the same with the other dowel, and then last but not least we're going to stitch up the turning gap. So here we go. I have already pulled up the lining and I have folded it in by 1/4 of an inch and just put some clips in to hold it. Normally I actually machine my linings closed, but I think with this, because of where it is, rather than being in the centre of the lining, I think it's easier to actually hand stitch it. So what I'm going to do is start off with a knotted thread, and I'm going to just pop it in to start things off, and then tuck the knot inside. And then what you're going to do, we're going to use ladder stitch to close this, which means we are literally going to pick up a little bit from each side, really small stitches if you can,
working along the ridge of where you folded everything. So a bit from one side, a bit from the other side, and push through. And we're going to keep going until we get to the end. So when you get to the end of the seam, what you're looking to do is stitch a few more stitches going along, and then we're going to bury the end of the fabric, the end of the thread in the fabric. So change direction a couple of times. That's it. So, fairly invisible stitching. Let's pop that down inside. Now, I've put these on just to train the edges, which I often like to do. And that's it. We are done. As I said, it's a little bit creased compared to how I would like it, but that's a lesson not to use cheap interfacing. And then to close it up. There we go. So you can pop it in your bag and close it up if you want to. If you need to get it out, got the handles. And otherwise, you can reach in. There we go. Quick look at the zipper pockets, phone pocket, pen pocket, and 2 other random pockets. And not to forget, keychain. So well done. If you've gotten this far in the video, then hopefully you have a beautiful bag organiser just like this. Let's just do a little recap. So the handles fold back, you've got your pockets inside, you've got your key fob. I'm actually using one of mine as a desk organiser because it just looked very useful. Nicely fits an A4 notebook inside, A5 notebook inside. And one other suggestion is you could actually make it in a nice exterior fabric, put on some strap connectors, and then you'd have a lovely little sort of basket bag type thing for the summer. So thank you for sewing along with me. I hope you enjoyed that. Like, subscribe and all that sort of thing if you want to see more of my videos. And otherwise, I'll see you in a couple of months. Bye for now.